This is an EKG lecture following about some of the things that occur in the heart during the different phases and following the actual electrocardiogram readout. Starting out, just to explain what we're seeing here, this top red line is a marker of aortic pressure. The second one in here, that's kind of hidden in between the two, is the phonocardiogram. This would be when the different heart sounds are going to be. Down here is the ventricle volume. So this is going to be following basically all what happens to the volume in the ventricles. And then down here, this is the electrocardiogram. And then down here is showing the different phases of the heart. And then the colors here designating when diastole and systole are occurring. And then down here in this bottom corner, I have drawn out a picture of essentially what's happening. Of course, these really are all up, but I put them down here because it's a little easier to see what's happening. So starting off, we are going to just basically follow the electrocardiogram and then relate it to everything else that's happening. So everything's going to be in relation to this electrocardiogram. So starting off here, the P wave that you see right here, the P wave is a representation of the atrial depolarization. So during atrial depolarization, there is an electrical current that is going from the SA node, and it's going to be going through here to the AV node. So it's depolarizing here on the atria. So you're going to see a little upward inflection there on the EKG. Now, because the atria are depolarizing, that's going to be basically these top muscles are squeezing down on the blood. And so when this occurs, it's going to, any squeezing of anything is going to cause aortic pressure to start to increase. Because the whole system has an increase of pressure, right? Because these are decreasing the size of the container. So atrial contraction following the depolarization, small spike in pressure there. It also is going to result in a small spike in ventricular volume, and this is because these squeezing down, where's the blood going to go? The blood's going to get pushed into the ventricles. So that's gonna raise the ventricular volume a little bit, but not very much. So now what's going to happen is following the P wave, the atrial depolarization, there's going to be the PR segment. And this is basically, the PR segment accounts for the signal going from the sinoatrial node through the fast and slow internodal pathways to the AV node through the bundle of His, branching between the right bundle branch, left bundle branch, and dividing into down to all the way to the Purkinje fibers, of course, in the left bundle branch, dividing into the left posterior fascicle and left anterior fascicle. So all that is kind of occurring here during this PR segment. Now, the actual depolarization of the ventricles is going to occur here starting in the QRS complex, which is this segment here, going from the Q wave through the R wave through the S wave. And I forgot to mention that, well, I'll cover that. I probably should. Okay, so this first phase, these phases are kind of divided up as to when different heart valves are open or closed. Okay, so this phase 1 that occurs during diastole is actually going to represent this whole time when the AV valve is open. Okay, now when I say AV valve, I'm saying atrioventricular valves. So these are our cuspid valves on the right atrium to the right ventricle. It's the tricuspid, and over here on the other side, the left atrium to the left ventricle, it's the mitral or bicuspid. So when those are open, it means the blood is emptying into the atria, and this is all accounting for this period right up until, really it stays open this whole period up until the ventricles contract. And it's the backward contraction of the ventricles that actually causes these AV valves to close. There's no valves up here, so these ones close. When they close right during the peak of ventricular depolarization. And following the ventricular depolarization is when the muscle is going to begin to start to contract, and the aortic pressure is going to rise, and the ventricular volume is going to drop as the ventricles push the blood from the right ventricle into the pulmonary circulation to the lungs so that it can be oxygenated, and from the left ventricle into the aortic valve, which goes into the rest of the body, as well as, I guess we'll cover the coronary arteries later maybe. So this QRS complex is covering the depolarization of the ventricles. And that really, right in the peak of that, when this AV valve closes, is when we start phase 2. Phase 2 is right when the AV valve closes, but before the aortic valve opens. What I'm saying here is that these ventricles actually are going to contract for a while. They really have to get a lot of pressure. The pressure has to be so strong that it overcomes the resistance of the pressure in the aorta. So it has to get high enough that it exceeds the pressure, the backflow of the aorta. And when it finally does reach a pressure that is above that of the aorta, that is when the aortic valve is going to open, and that will signal the beginning of phase 3. Now, I was pointing out here that, maybe I failed to point out that phase 2 and 3 are going to represent systole. Systole is when things are contracting and tightening down. So you see systole starts right in the peak here, right when the aortic valve, right when it opens, and it ends right when the aortic valve closes. So systole is really gauging around the activity of the aortic valve. Systole represents right here, the top of the R wave. Oh goodness, sorry, I apologize. Systole, it is the aortic valve being open, but it actually also, it begins when the AV valve closes. There's a little gap here in between here when the aortic valve hasn't quite opened. So systole begins when the aortic valve closes, and it ends when the aortic valve closes. So it goes from the close to close, and it includes the whole period of time that the aortic valve is open. And then here in phase 4 is when I probably should relate this back to here. So here's the QRS complex, going down here to the S wave, and then coming back up to the J point, and there's the ST segment. The ST segment is going to represent this little period of time before the ventricles repolarize again. And so, which means they're still in full, they're still in full contraction. They haven't repolarized yet. So now this aortic valve is going to close. Looks like it closes right at the point towards the end of the T wave, and then the AV valve opens up again right at the end of the T wave. And then we go through this period of filling. This filling period is diastole. Everything's kind of pouring into the atria. And then and diastole covers 4 and 1. So this whole period here, again, it all fills, and then it just repeats over again. And that is kind of a basic understanding of what's happening during the during systole, diastole, the phases of the heart, what's occurring mechanically with the heart as well as electrically. And these different heart sounds are also included in there. I failed to mention those as well. 1, 2, 3. So hope that makes sense.